Quick pregame show here. So this was a lovely thing that I rediscovered, as is much in the news. The war in Ukraine and the Russian invasion has been much on my mind, and along with that comes thoughts of when I grew up. I grew up on military bases in Germany, and there was a cartoon that I watched called "What Have We Learned, Charlie Brown?" that was very meaningful to me, and I went and I rediscovered this. I actually went and found it again to review it, because a lot of the feelings that are brought up by seeing that war happening, seeing it unfold, and seeing its potential consequences, brought up a lot of feelings that I feel like this kind of touched on for me. So I'd like to share it. So Charlie Brown, there are like 26 of these cartoons throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and they're really just lovely kids programming, and are willing to tackle topics that are frankly far beyond the scope of what one would expect from children's programming. In this case, how to respond to the overwhelming volume of death in the First and Second World Wars. And that is what this one tackles, and it does so in a way that has a lot of grace and a lot of introspection and reflection, and it does something really interesting with the poem at the end, which is kind of where we're going to wind up. But just to kind of give you a sense of it, the Charlie Brown kids, they're wrapping up an exchange trip in France, which is very rural, very bucolic, lovely. And then they make their way to Omaha Beach, where Linus begins having almost an associative image rush of footage from the Allied invasion on Omaha Beach in Normandy, and some of the visuals are quite striking. Let's see, Linus sees the bombers going overhead, see some of the breakers on the beach, and those as well, some of the anti-tank, sort of debris and obstacles, and Linus is just sort of hallucinating this massive destruction that happened on this one very horrible day during a very horrible war. And so they kind of go through what D-Day is, what it means, and they even include a fully animated replay of Eisenhower's recollection of D-Day. And it's very striking and very moving, and since, of course, World War II was not the only war fought on French grounds, they do make their way to the Allied cemetery, or the American cemetery for World War I soldiers, and wind up in Flanders Field with the many dead there. And they wrap it up with a poem titled "In Flanders Fields," which is considered one of the great war poems, great elegiac war poems coming out of the First and Second World War, but not without some problems. And we can look at that here. And so they do a reading of this, which, let's see, "In Flanders Fields the poppies blow, between the crosses row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks, still bravely singing, fly scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields." So this is the part of the poem that the cartoon stops at, and then it repeats the refrain, "In Flanders Fields the poppies blow, between the crosses row on row." The last stanza is omitted. "Take up your quarrel with the foe, to you from failing hands we throw the torch, be yours to hold it high. If you break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields." And criticism of this poem has often looked at it as incidentally being pro-war, when the first two stanzas are actually beautifully elegiac and memorialize the wartime dead quite well. But the final stanza is kind of this sort of like very gung-ho, keep fighting, which was not a sentiment that many people who survived these wars felt really cool about. And Charles Schulz himself was a veteran of, I believe, World War II, and so he would have had some feelings on this. So I think it's very interesting that this cartoon likewise took the sort of nationalistic, almost potentially jingoistic stanza out of this and left it at the elegy. So Yeah, so that is What Have We Learned, Charlie Brown. It is available on, I think, Vimeo? Yeah, if you do a search for it. Evening, Iceman Dan. It's great to hear you, or see you, or both. I hear the words in my head. That's how it goes. If you look up criticism of Flanders Fields by Paul Fussell, Fussell, Paul Fussell. He has some of the most stabbing criticism of Flanders Fields, and I think that I don't know if his criticism preceded or was contemporary with the use of this poem in this children's show, but they certainly seem to have had the same takeaway that last stanza is potentially making the same mistake that the first two stanzas sort of pay tribute to. So, yes, favorite cartoon of mine growing up. Very much sensitized me to war and its consequences. But, on a cheerier note, Elden Ring. Oh, Deltahead stream is always kind of a nice snapshot of what happens to be going on at any given time in my media consumption, and so sometimes you have these things back to back.